this sounds like the course of action that was taken by Iceland, where they refused to accept the debt as being the debt of the people. It was considered to be the debt of the banks. And I'm maybe confusing the issue slightly, but we did have a situation there where one nation says, no, we're not going to pay. They allowed the banks to fail. In fact, they started to prosecute the bankers. I mean, how do you think the Icelandic people dealt with that situation?
Well, I was very close to that situation. I've been to Iceland probably half a dozen times since the collapse in 2007, 2008. I know many parliamentarians there, and I've been close to the situation. And it's not exactly as you described.
Okay.
Iceland has not implemented the monetary reform solution yet. Basically, the Icelandic banks, which by then had migrated to Great Britain and Europe, tried, when they collapsed, the British government tried to claim that since the bank started in Iceland, that the Icelandic people are responsible for all of the skyrocketing debts, the bubble that this bank created. And had that been the case, the Icelanders are very respectable people, and if it had actually been a reasonable debt, they would have tried to pay it, but it was impossible. The debt would have represented the entire GDP of the nation. So it was impossible. So they had, just as in the United States, and we had to figure out something else, the Icelandic people had to figure out something else. And they just said, I'm sorry, but these banks were not national banks. They were commercial banks with an Icelandic name or an Icelandic board of directors. But our nation, the people of our nation, are not responsible for this debt. That's what they did. And it was under incredible pressure. The British government at one point, I had this directly from Brigitte Jonsdottir, who is a member of parliament. She said the British government threatened to completely cut off the flow of imports to Iceland from Europe unless they agreed to these the original terms that the IMF and the creditors tried to impose on them. They said, you have 3 weeks worth of food left. We will cut you off, and 3 weeks from now your nation will starve. And the Icelanders just stared them down and said, sorry, we're not going to do it. They took to the streets with highway flares. 10,000 of them surrounded the presidential palace and forced the president to veto the measure that the Icelandic parliament at that point had been forced into signing.
Yeah.
And so then they had to go back and create a new agreement. And now Iceland's doing very well. And a friend of mine who is now in the Icelandic parliament, a guy by the name of Frosty Sigurðsson, actually.
Okay.
He speaks perfect English without an accent. You wouldn't know that he's not a Brit or an American, and there's a reason for that. He was head of IBM in Iceland for 28 years. He's basically a very technology-oriented guy. He speaks very succinctly and forcefully, and he's now retired from IBM, and he's going to devote the rest of his life to making sure that Iceland gets on a proper monetary reform path and becomes the first nation to do so. Then the rest of the nations, once this occurs, can see that, oh yes, it is working, and gee, now Iceland is suddenly a monetary powerhouse again. Maybe we should see what they're doing, and that's the plan. And Frosty will see this through. He's already been asked to prepare a report for the Icelandic Parliament, which he did. That was reviewed very favorably about 6 months ago, and now the Parliament has impaneled a committee with Frosty as its head to go ahead and do a full-fledged study of the legislation that Frosty's original report recommended, and that will probably not be voted on until the first of next year. But yeah, within 6 months to a year, this could become a law in Iceland, and then we could really see some changes. And this is absolutely the path that Scotland should follow.